You're listening to the Whole Hog Football Podcast, sponsored by Bud Anderson Home Services, bringing you the latest news, position analysis, and more. Here's your hosts, Matt Jones and Scotty Bordelon.
When we started our Alabama preview podcast last week, I said I thought that there were 11 of 13 SEC teams that Arkansas could play with right now. It turns out there's 12 of 13. They can play with Alabama, and they showed that on Saturday in a 42-35 loss. I don't know that you can call it a great performance by Arkansas because defensively it was one of the worst performances they've ever had, but there's also the fact that they were on the road in Tuscaloosa against what we think is a pretty good team, and they hung with them for 4 quarters, and I think that's to be commended. We'll talk quite a bit about that game today. Matt Jones with Clay Henry of Hogs Illustrated and Scotty Bordelon of WholeHogSports.com. Clay, you were in Tuscaloosa. What were your takeaways from watching that game the other night?
Yeah, some of the similar things that Sam Pittman said after the game that I felt like, the line of scrimmage, Arkansas held its own, which is a huge step up where normally they get whipped at the line of scrimmage by Alabama. And I think that's validation that what he's doing in his program on a daily basis in practice, the physicality that he asked for and the toughness is there. And I think the other part that's obvious is that the secondary still needs a lot more speed, and you have to be able to match Alabama's speed at wide receiver. And that's where Alabama has been really good for the last 6, 7, 8 years. I think ever since I remember Julio Jones coming to Alabama, they've always had the speed at wide receiver that can really cause a problem. You try to load the box to stop the run, and they're going to run by you.
Yeah, I think the thing that impressed me the most was the success Arkansas had offensively. And it's really interesting tracking social media during games, especially when Arkansas struggles a little bit and, fans aren't seeing the plays run that they want to be called. And when Arkansas, goes 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, there's a lot of people that are calling for Kendall Briles to, run the good plays basically. And Arkansas had a lot of success offensively the other day. The issue was not the offense, it was the defense letting a guy like Jameson Williams, the best receiver that Alabama's got, split through their cloud coverage, 30, 35 yards downfield. Like that kind of thing can't happen. But I didn't hear just a whole lot of talk about, Arkansas's defense wasn't very good, but we didn't hear just a whole lot about that. It just kind of falls on, people get on Kendall Briles a lot when Arkansas's offense isn't really humming. But they just went and scored 35 points on the road against a pretty dadgum good Alabama defense, I think. And Kendall, and KJ and Traylon, they found some deficiencies in Alabama's defense and exploited it. But Arkansas's offense was far from the problem. And I just think it's, like Clay said, some of the guys in the secondary got to improve. Like Ladarius Bishop, as fast as that kid is, he gets beat across his face and deep far too often. Kari Johnson took a really poor angle on a pass play to an Alabama tight end. Like that should be a guy that you feel like foot speed wise he should be able to track. Monterey Brown, I think, gave up a touchdown too, but he was fairly solid. That secondary though is just that's what's got to improve against Missouri.
I think Alabama coming into the game was number 4 nationally in total defense. Arkansas had 468 yards against them on Saturday. It was a big deal to have that many yards against Alabama. Jameson Williams, Scotty mentioned, had 190 yards and 3 touchdowns, had 3 real long touchdown catches against the Razorbacks. He was named a Biletnikoff Award finalist today. We talked last week on the podcast about Traylon Burks being left off the semifinalist list for the Biletnikoff Award. But I thought, Clay, that Saturday's game against Alabama might have been the best one that he's played since he's been in a Razorback uniform. He's had games where he's had more yards. He had over 200 yards last year against Missouri. But given everything, given the opponent, given the venue, given the fact that he was playing through at least one injury, I thought it was the most impressive that he's looked in a Hog uniform.
I think you're right, Matt. And he deserved to be on the same field with with Williams and Mitchie, who they're going to be drafted high. And I think you can just see the quality. And I think that anybody, the NFL scouts or NFL draft analysts that question Treylon's speed, when you saw him hold all 5 members of the Alabama secondary at bay on about a 50-yard sprint to the middle of the field, you know that the big man can rumble. He played well enough that Nick Saban, who coaches the cornerbacks, by the way, benched Josh Jobe and put a true freshman on him at the end, Kool-Aid McKinstry. And I think that that's a name that you're going to hear a lot of. He's going to be a great player that Alabama didn't really want to play in this game against Burks, but had no choice after the way Burks really trashed Jobe. I thought that was the highlight play of the game that kind of, here's your chance. You get the ball back at the 1-yard line, down 1 score. Really, you can score a touchdown, kick an extra point, and win the game. 7 minutes left. Their option was to go 99 yards in 7 minutes. Don't leave any more time on the clock for Alabama. It was 3rd and 5, and they had Treylon to the left. They had Warren Thompson to the right, and they threw a back shoulder pass down the Alabama sideline that was a little short for Thompson. He didn't really make a very good play on it. And on the other side of the field, there was Treylon's like raising his both hands, like, throw it up for me. And I think that play usually works. That's the only criticism that I would give of Arkansas's offense, and that might not be Kendall Briles. It might be KJ. So, he was a special player in a special game that highlighted wide receivers. I'm talking about Treylon Burks.
They just announced the finalists for the Biletnikoff Award. I'd be interested to know if any voters like myself after the Alabama game, wrote in Treylon as one of the finalists. And, I don't know if I'm supposed to say this or not, but I had Jameson Williams 1, Treylon Burks 2. And I just think they're as fine receivers as you're going to find anywhere. And I know I wrote this on Saturday, and I understand that I'm young. I'm 28, but it's just like week after week, it's becoming increasingly difficult for me to imagine that there's been an Arkansas receiver that has all of the traits that Treylon Burks has and is, just was as good as Treylon is. I mean, he's got the speed, like Clay said, to outrun Alabama DBs in a game where he's been beaten up a lot, and he can go up and get 50-50 balls, and they really turn into more like 80-20 balls when you're throwing them to Treylon. He's been really good. That game against Alabama was probably the best that we've seen him. And I don't think Treylon's this kind of guy, because he said he didn't really care whatsoever that he wasn't among the 10 semifinalists for the Biletnikoff Award. But, I think he recognized that, the magnitude of the game against Alabama, and for Arkansas to have a shot, he had to play well. And I think he more than stepped up. He was incredible.
Scotty, I think, by the way, 28 doesn't seem young to me. It seems about right. And I think you've seen enough to know. And if you want to really go back and analyze the top receivers in Arkansas history, you probably saw some of them that would compare to Treylon, and that would be during the Petrino time. I think the only body that had the skill sets that really all that Treylon has, which is speed, size, strength, length, is Greg Childs. And you can go back and talk about Chuck Dykes, and he didn't have the size, and he played in a different era. And I can't think of anybody else. Derek Russell was pretty good. He's probably 6'2", and he played in the NFL. Jarius Wright, different type receiver altogether, more of a scat back little guy, as Joe Adams. No, I think that this is a guy that is singularly the best in all areas. And we've seen something the last 2 years. Didn't really see it his freshman year, but seen something the last 2 years where you knew you could put on a show. And I tend to try to watch the line play, but I forgive anybody that just watch Treylon Burks on every play.
Kobe Hamilton's another one, Clay, that I think was kind of similar in size and speed to Burks, but there have not been very many players that have been like him. And we talked about this, the Biletnikoff Award, and in any of these awards, you have to have national exposure, I think, to appeal to the voters who are not watching your games all the time. And they got the national exposure the other night against Alabama. Figures came in this morning, said that there were 5.5 million average 5.5 million average audience. That basically means that every minute of the game, there was an average of 5.5 million people watching the game. And in the fourth quarter of that game, there were over 7 million people watching the Arkansas-Alabama game on CBS. It was the most watched game of the weekend. Burks just hasn't had that type of audience to perform in front of this season. And it's kind of unfortunate. If you would have put this game, say, a week ago, then when those Biletnikoff ballots are coming in, maybe he ends up on that semifinalist. Maybe he ends up on the finalist ballot.
You may be right about that, Matt. Unfortunately, I don't know that the bulk of the people that hold a ballot get to watch games. And I say that because I don't get to watch them. I mean, I'm busy. I see little snippets of game, but I'm busy covering Arkansas. And I look around, and Scotty's probably in the same boat. He's working a 9-hour or 10-hour day on game day, both in pregame, during the game, and afterwards to get his work done. How much of these other games do you see? And so it comes down to a stat battle. And they look at total number of catches, total number of yards, total number of touchdowns, and they make their vote. And if Treylon's numbers are just similar to these other guys, he may not get the vote. And I think I used to think, let's have these big, huge balloting sessions to make the awards like they do for the Biletnikoff and they do for the Heisman. But I think a smaller committee that really focuses in on the top candidates might be the way to go. And here I am on a lot of these ballots, but I feel ill-equipped to make the decisions that really matter.
Speaking of Heisman, Bryce Young, he strengthened his Heisman case, I think, Saturday against Arkansas, threw for 559 yards and 5 touchdowns. Really my first time to be able to watch a full game of Bryce Young this year, and I was really impressed with what I saw from him. But let's look at this from an Arkansas defensive perspective, because we mentioned that they gave up 671 yards. There's only 3 other games in the history of Arkansas football when they've given up more yards, and 2 of them are pretty memorable. One was the 2005 USC game. That was the most they've ever given up. One was the Johnny Manziel game in 2012 in College Station. One that kind of flies under the radar, I think, a little bit was the final game that Brett Bielema coached when Barry Odom's Missouri team came in and put up 696 yards in Fayetteville. 671 yards. I know that teams give up more yardage now than they ever have, and you're, unless maybe your Kirby Smart's defense, you're not going to go back and ever have the old time type of defensive stats. But Clay, how do you justify 671 yards that they gave up the other night? I know Arkansas was without players. Is it a matter though of talent? Is it a matter of a really hot quarterback? What were your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it comes down, when you give plays up over the top, it comes down to safety plays. And you take Jalen Catalon off the field, and it is a major deal. I mean, you just go back and you think, well, would have Arkansas been if they'd taken Ken Hamlin off the field, or Tony Bua off the field when he played safety, or Steve Atwater? Your defense just changed in a dramatic way. And Miles Slusher is improving. I think Simeon Blair, you got to keep telling yourself that guy's a walk-on. There's a drop off in talent in this secondary after you lose Jalen Catalon. And Joe Fouché, he's a run guy. I mean, I don't think he's a deep pass defender. I mean, I think he's an extra linebacker, kind of a hybrid guy. But it's and then you go down to the Arkansas cornerbacks, and Kari Johnson is still kind of breaking in. But if you blitz And they did in the second half. And I can show you several plays where they put their secondary in a disadvantage. You will give up big plays against Alabama. That's just the nature of their offense, and that's the way they want to play. And Catalan played against them last year, and they didn't give up big plays. They made them run the ball. And I think that that's the major area that you look at. You've got to keep getting safeties and keep training them.
Going back to the Heisman Trophy talk, it's worth noting that two of those three biggest offensive performances against Arkansas came in games where the other team had the Heisman Trophy winner. In 2005, it was Reggie Bush at Southern Cal. In 2012, it was Manziel at Texas A&M. The Whole Hog Football Podcast is brought to you by Bud Anderson Home Services. Visit them online at gocallbud.com.
Bud Anderson is proud to be the official heating and cooling provider for the Arkansas Razorbacks. This partnership will support all Razorback athletics for over 400 student athletes across 19 sports. Woo-pig!
WholeHogSports.com has the largest, most experienced staff of reporters covering sports in Arkansas. Football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. You'll find it at WholeHogSports.com. The website includes up-to-minute news, daily commentaries, and award-winning photography from the staffs of Hogs Illustrated and the Democrat Gazette. For subscriptions, call 1-800-757-6277. That's 1-800-757-6277. Or visit us online today. WholeHogSports.com.
Want more coverage of your home team? Download the Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Check out the Fan Zone and get up-to-the-minute videos, podcasts, and features on football, basketball, baseball, recruiting, and more. Search for Whole Hog Sports on Apple TV, Roku, and Amazon Fire at home. And take it with you on the go by downloading it for your mobile device in your app store. The Whole Hog Sports Video on Demand app. Get it today. Welcome back to the Whole Hog Football Podcast.
It's not really Razorback football related, but some news that came out this morning is that Garth Brooks is going to play a concert at Razorback Stadium in Fayetteville. I see Scotty getting a little nervous. We're going to ask Scotty about his thoughts on Garth Brooks here in just a second. Clay, have you ever been to a Garth Brooks concert?
I have not, but I think I went to a 3-day Garth Brooks weekend at Yukon, Oklahoma. In 1990, when No Fences came out, the legendary Garth Brooks album. It's got hit after hit after hit. So Garth Brooks is from Yukon. I covered for 4 days the Class B state basketball tournament at Yukon, which Yukon's a 7A school. It's a big metropolitan area just to the west of Oklahoma City. And not very many people come to those type games. You know, the towns are 250 to 500 in Class B in Oklahoma. So the gym's pretty much empty. And there's, 4 games one day, it goes, maybe it was 8 games the first day. I can't remember if there's 16 teams or what it was, but the people running the event were the Yukon cheerleaders. And it was me, the Daily Oklahoman staff writer, and the Yukon football coach were at the scorer's table, and that's it. And they had a cassette player to play music at halftime in between games. And there was an Aerosmith CD, and maybe it's one other CD, 2 or 3 CDs that he was going to play. And just before the start of the first game, the cheerleaders ran over with this New Fences CD. And he played a couple of songs, and they were good songs. I liked them. I didn't know any of them at that time. And then he switched to the Aerosmith CD. I thought there was going to be a riot at the scorer's table. All 24 cheerleaders swarmed us, and we played nothing but Garth Brooks for 4 more days. I could sing The Thunder Rolls, Friends in Low Faces. I mean, I was never so glad to get out of a place. I'm sorry, I was at a Garth Brooks concert.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see the attendance like for that.
I think it'll be the highest attendance they've ever had at Razorback Stadium for any event.
Yeah, very well could be. I think it's a
record beer sales.
Yes, yeah, there's no doubt. There's no doubt. I think it's a pretty neat deal, and I know there will be a lot of folks that come out to that. I haven't been to this point like a huge Garth Brooks fan. I dated a girl in college once who liked Garth more than I like Flatland, Parker, McCollum, and Turnpike all put together, and kind of put me off on him. But that will probably be a pretty fun show. As soon as I found out I was working in the hotel room, I started blaring Friends in Low Places. So had to get in the Garth Brooks mood for a minute.
One of my son's favorite songs is Not Counting You by Garth Brooks. Back when I was a kid, the Arkansas-Oklahoma State Fair in Fort Smith, every year they would bring in these huge names. And one year they brought in Garth Brooks. This was before he really exploded, but after he had, become a pretty big name in country music. And so somewhere around, 1990, 1991, I saw him at Harper Stadium in Fort Smith at the Arkansas-Oklahoma State Fair. I think this kind of goes to a new leadership style within the university structure. And it may not just be the athletics director. I mean, you've got a new chancellor on campus, a lot of different things. There hasn't been a concert inside Razorback Stadium in 14 years. And I've always wondered why they didn't have more concerts on campus, whether it be at Razorback Stadium, whether it be at Bud Walton Arena. I know in the questionnaire that they sent to people kind of in this early stage of renovating Bud Walton Arena is, would you be interested in seeing more concerts at this venue? I think this is the start of something that's going to become a little bit more routine. I'm not going to say it's going to be every year, but it wouldn't surprise me to start seeing more events like this on campus, whether it be at the football stadium, the basketball arena, maybe even the baseball stadium for certain artists.
Whoever follows Garth Brooks will have a tough act. he will put on a show, and it will be. I saw George Strait at the Cheyenne Frontier Days Rodeo, that concert, but I bet you that this one will be every bit as good as that, because you're talking about one of the greatest showmen in the history of entertainment. Garth knows what he's doing.
What was the last concert in Razorback Stadium?
It was 2008. It was during Walmart shareholders, and it was Carrie Underwood and Keith Urban. And then at one point, I think during a shareholders meeting, they had Jimmy Buffett at Razorback Stadium. That's a memory burned into my brain, watching all the Parrot Heads march down Stadium Drive toward the football stadium. One of which I think might have been Dudley Dawson. All right, let's get back on to let's get back on track here, talking about football. It's a short week for the Razorbacks. They turn around. They've got 6 days to go from the Alabama game to the Missouri game. Sam Pittman actually mentioned last week that he was glad the Alabama game wasn't a night game, because it just gives them a little bit more time. I mean, they got back into Fayetteville, say at 11 o'clock versus getting in at 2 or 3 a.m. Helps in the recovery. They had to turn around and practice on Sunday. And Pittman said he was really impressed with their practice Sunday. Said he thought it was one of their better practices they've had. They don't do that very often. They give them Sunday off a lot. They practice more on Monday. It's a practice schedule that I think he picked up from Kirby Smart at Georgia. And so, Clay, what are your thoughts on the short week and how that affects preparation for this game? It's not just Arkansas. Missouri's having to go through the same thing.
Yeah, I think the number one part of that is if you're banged up with injuries, and how you recover and how you bounce back, and it's a major part of this game. And I think that the number one question everybody had as soon as the Alabama game was over was, how will Treylon Burks be for Missouri? And if you have Missouri, you got a chance to win. If you don't, that changes things a little bit. And Sam's not really the top guy in football history to go into detail on injuries, but we know Burks is hurt, and he did address it on Monday, where he talked about that he's banged up and sore. Didn't say from what. Whether it be a shoulder or a chest injury, not really sure what that injury is that was plaguing him in the Alabama game, but he practiced and it'll be fine by game time. That's not a guarantee of any stretch that how he'll be in 2 more days, but that was at least some encouraging word that probably kept the line from changing any, as far as what is it, Arkansas minus 15 right now?
Opened at 15. I don't know if that's changed or not.
Yeah, but I don't think that kind of a release of his injury status would change the line any. If he'd said that, hey, he's questionable, I think you would have seen the line drop 3 to 4 points. I think he means that much to Arkansas.
I think if you're an Arkansas fan, listening to Sam say that the team jumped right back into practice and right back into work, getting after it on Sunday, that had to be, and bringing a good bit of energy and enthusiasm to that practice. That had to be, music to your ears, I think, because I know me personally, like on days, after you have a long draining day that's, can be a little bit taxing on your body, the hardest thing to do is just get up and do it again. It's like you play Alabama on Saturday and then you're right back at it preparing for your next game less than 24 hours later. That's I think that's a good sign. That's a really good sign that, Sam has instilled a lot of toughness in these kids and they want to get back on the practice field because they see 8 wins potentially right on the horizon and, potentially 9, if you win your bowl game. I think they're really hyper focused right now. And even though, you go to Alabama and lose, you fought as well as any Arkansas team has against Alabama in a long time. And, lots of encouraging things from the weekend, but I think them getting right back to it and getting after it again on Sunday was super encouraging.
Something Pittman said Monday that kind of surprised me was that he had been told that they're estimating anywhere from 65 to 70,000 tickets are going to be sold for this game. Now, that doesn't mean everybody's going to show up. A lot of times you'll buy, tickets, say through a season ticket package, and you don't have any intent on going to that Black Friday game. We've all been to these games before in Fayetteville and Columbia. They've never been very well attended. In fact, that's why Arkansas put the Missouri game in Little Rock at one point. That's why Missouri was going to move this game to Arrowhead Stadium in Kansas City at one point. I was really surprised when I heard that there's this much interest in people attending the Arkansas Missouri game, because it just has not been like that. But I think it goes back, Scotty, to people are really fired up about this football team, and they'll go out and they'll support a winner.
And it could be the last time you see Traylon Burks. That's just kind of the reality of it too. And I was thinking last weekend when you see Traylon doubled over on the sideline and he's favoring a wrist, and the broadcast crew said that he's got a little bit of a chest issue and he's battled some ankle issues in the past. I'm just thinking, man, like at a certain point, Traylon's got to look out for his best interests. And it would be, I don't think anybody would jump down his throat if he, maybe sat out the ball game and protected his investment. Because he's right now, if he's not drafted in the first round of the draft in the spring, I think something's wrong. And it could be the last chance that Arkansas fans get to see a lot of guys, but Traylon is one of those special guys that fans definitely need to come out and see potentially one last time. I think he's going to give it a good effort, but I'm really excited about the Friday game. And, I think there's going to be a little bit of, I don't want to say animosity, but I think both teams are going to come into this thing with a chip on their shoulders, because they're not really they're not fighting for bowl eligibility on either side, but they're fighting for, they're trying to climb up that bowl game ladder a little bit. And I think we'll probably see, Eli Drinkwitz come out with some tricks up his sleeve, because he just kind of seems like that kind of guy. He'll throw some wrinkles out. And I think Sam Pittman's going to do the same thing. And looking forward to a fun game. And hopefully it's not the last time we see Traylon, but man, if it is, it's been incredible to watch.
Pittman said that he thinks Burks will probably play against Missouri. Also said that Hudson Clark went through practice on Monday in a green no contact jersey. So there's a chance that Clark could be back. We think he's been in concussion protocol based on the hit that he took against his friendly fire is from Hayden Hendry during the LSU game, and he didn't make the trip or play during the Alabama game. One other note on personnel that Pittman had on Monday was that Dalton Wagner is going to return to the football team for the 2022 season. He's mentioned that he is trying to recruit Bumper Poole. He's trying to re-recruit John Ridgway, who's got a Senior Bowl invitation. Scotty mentioned Traylon Burks. we don't think he's going to be back next season. I mean, I think that it's pretty obvious what his draft potential is. But Clay, there are a couple of others that are in that conversation. Jalen Catalon, you mentioned earlier. Ricky Stromberg is one who I think has got a potential NFL draft year coming up in the spring. What are your thoughts about the players that Arkansas is going to try to, I guess, re-recruit this offseason and try to get back to campus, the likes of Stromberg, Ridgeway, Poole, Catalon, Monteric Brown as well?
Yeah, I had thought that most of those guys would come back. I'm talking about Stromberg and Wagner and Poole. Don't know about Catalon. And when you're going through injuries and rehab, that's kind of a dicey deal. It changes things there, but all it takes is one team to really like you. And I think going into the season, we thought that he might be a first rounder, but he may have slipped a little bit, having to miss the whole season. He didn't play well early, and we think it's because of injury, but I can't tell you what the NFL teams say. And if he slipped financially, it might be in his best picture to come back and play another year. So I don't know. I mean, I've kind of felt like he was done when he announced that he was going to have surgery on his shoulder, but that's always a dicey deal as far as, is it better you make more money by coming back? Don't know. And I don't know. He may want to. That's really the bottom line for these guys. Do they want to play more in college? Are they enjoying it and having fun, or is their dream just to go on to the NFL?
I thought Nate Allen, who writes for us, made a good thought about a week ago. And he said that maybe this year is a little bit different in terms of NFL draft prospects, because now with name, image, likeness, they could potentially come back to school and do really well for themselves from a financial standpoint. And maybe it's a little bit easier of a bridge year, say from your year before you go to the draft to your actual draft year. Just something worth watching during the offseason, because it should be an eventful offseason. Anybody who played on the 2020 roster gets that free COVID year back from the NCAA. That would certainly help with some of these players. We'll be back with another podcast later this week before Thanksgiving that will preview the Razorbacks game against Missouri. We'll also have a basketball podcast of Mid-America, Scotty's in Kansas City, covering the Razorbacks in that tournament. They played Kansas State and won on Monday night. They'll play Cincinnati Tuesday night at T-Mobile Center in downtown Kansas City. Until next time, for Clay Henry and Scotty Bordelon, I'm Matt Jones. We appreciate you joining us.
The proceeding has been a production of WholeHogSports.com. Look for our latest podcast on iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast store. And visit us anytime at WholeHogSports.com for the latest news and commentary.